What is the investment needed in order to create a return on investment of your hustle, your passion, and your purpose? This is the ROI. Hello and welcome to the ROI, the show where we sit down with creators and innovators to get their insight on how to generate a return on your hustle, your passion, and your ambition in order to meet your bottom line and get to the top. My name is Rhonesha Byng, the founder and CEO of Her Agenda. I'm your host. On this episode, we have joining us Netta Jenkins, who is the head of diversity and inclusion at IAC Applications. Thank you so much, Netta, for joining us. I'm really excited to have you here and talk about this very, very important topic.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah.
As well.
It's such a buzzword now, diversity and inclusion.
It is.
Almost to the point where it doesn't mean anything anymore. So can you actually just tell us a little bit about your role? You're the head of diversity and inclusion at IAC. Tell us a little bit about that and what initiatives that you're working on.
Absolutely. So my role at IAC Applications is really about ensuring that every single person has a seat at the table. So a lot of the times organizations have employee resource groups, right? Which is great because it's this sense of community that they end up forming. But what we end up seeing is that essentially they're siloed, segregated groups. So how can we bring everyone to the table where they're challenging each other, sharing content, and learning from each other and growing and thriving? And so at IAC Applications, I made a very bold decision along with the employees to remove those employee resource groups. Let's challenge each other and let's talk about these things every single day. So, I mean, discussions start from being a single parent to being a person of color in this society, LGBTQ. I mean, it really could be any single topic that you want to discuss. Bring it to the forum and let's talk about it. And it's an ongoing Slack channel that we have. And then based on that level of engagement and the conversations that we have, we then create programs around it.
That is bold.
Yes, it's
so
bold.
No ERGs,
no
just forums.
Yeah, just one forum called Diversity Ambassadors, where every single employee is a part of the discussion. And that is what it's about. You know, I think a lot of organizations, like I was saying, are so afraid of taking that risk of, you know, moving to the next step and the next level of you know, just not being comfortable anymore. And so we're tired being comfortable and we want to get to the meat of the issue. So let's talk about it. And that's the only way change can come about.
And you talked about a seat at the table, and a lot of people use that metaphor, but what about then the next step? Because people try to differentiate diversity and inclusion, because it's one thing, diversity is having the seat at the table, but then inclusion is being asked to be involved, or, you know, that phrase about being invited to the party versus being asked to dance. So what does that look like in your organization?
Again, I think for many organizations, they focus so much on the numbers, right? So we need this amount of people of color, this amount of women, this amount of LGBTQ. We are not for that, right? We want to make sure that we're bringing in diversity. But the number one thing for me is, are we curing these systemic issues, right? So when we have that person of color that comes in, or that woman that's a part of the organization, they're able to get to an executive level. Can they reach that level? And so a lot of the times what I do is I focus heavily on that. I focus heavily on connecting with executives, speaking with some of the senior leaders, talking about what advocating means, you know, what being an ally means, but also having these managers put together a D&I commitment plan. Right? So a lot of companies have their like big overarching mission or vision statement, but sometimes it doesn't trickle down to, you know, those managers and those smaller teams. So what does your team look like? What's that commitment plan that you're putting forth to ensure that every single member on your team has the opportunity to move up?
Yeah.
And those are things that I'm always, you know, seeking and focus on tremendously. A cool thing for 2019 is we are launching an incubator for, you know, people of color, women, LGBTQ. We have a lot of space in Yonkers, so working on that right now, and a couple pitch competitions. So there's a lot, in store that I'm excited about.
Yeah.
And just ensuring that people from underrepresented groups have opportunities to excel. But also, everyone else that's a part of the organization has that understanding as well, and they're pushing for this greatness and the success of everyone.
And you've been working in the space of diversity and inclusion all your life, is what you say.
Yes.
How many years is that really, all your life? And then also, what was the
goodness.
catalyst for you to get into the space?
Oh my goodness. It started actually when I was in middle school. So I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood. We experienced tremendous amounts of racism. I mean, it was serious to where, and I was telling you earlier, my mother was spit in her face by a Caucasian woman, and she told her, blacks don't belong in my neighborhood. I must have been around 7 years old at that time. And it always pains me because I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't do anything at that moment. And I didn't quite understand what was happening, although I saw like this human being spitting my mom's face, and now we're going to have to do something about it, right? To my mom being pulled over in the driveway, and the cop asking her, ma'am, are you lost? And she's like, no, I'm not lost. I'm in my driveway. I'm here. And then fast forward to middle school, being called the N-word and African monkey and all of these, terrible terms. And, my mother, me going back home one day, my mother saying to me, I didn't bring you on this earth to cry about things. I brought you on this earth to create change. And that was the pivotal moment in my life where I knew that I had to do it.
So you talked about how now diversity and inclusion, all these major corporations are talking about it. They're being transparent, putting out reports and whatnot.
Right.
But I'm sure you've seen it all, essentially, when it comes to this. Where do you think corporations are dropping the ball when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think corporations are too focused on the numbers. That's their only focus. They're focused on the organization looking good, the look of it. Like, look, we have all of these black people, and look, we have all of these Latinx people or women. And that's not the key to success. Again, it's really about digging into those systemic issues. Are you taking a look at your performance evaluations? Are they fair? What type of questions are you asking? Are you taking a look at compensation disparity? There are a lot of disparities within organizations that they're not taking care of, but they want more representation. And I always tell companies, prepare for representation.
Yeah.
And that way you'll be able to retain those employees.
Yep.
But if not, they'll leave. And what we're seeing is there are more people from underrepresented groups that are starting their own businesses. They don't want to work for corporations because they don't want to go through that.
Yep, because the systems, the culture, and the environment doesn't change, even though they're putting these numbers there. So,
it looks so
it's
great.
visibility, not true representation. And so, that leads me to the book that you're working on, Holistic Inclusion, where I'm assuming you would talk about some of this stuff.
Absolutely.
What was the inspiration behind the title, and what do you hope for readers to gain from it?
Yeah, absolutely. Holistic inclusion is really about just this new thought process. Like, what's the next level for diversity and inclusion? I think D&I is so stale. People have this twisted idea of what D&I is, like we were pointing to the numbers and the look of the company. And it's really about, again, curing some of those systemic issues. But I think there's a lot of books out there that focus on the diversity and inclusion theories and not so much of, okay, how can I implement some of these strategies so it works in my company? And so my book is almost like a workbook for organizations to be able to implement these strategies that have been tested and proven by me within my organization. I've seen success in, and I can, back that up with a lot of data. Tech people love data. And I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be dynamic, and it's going to be life-changing,
Yeah.
hopefully for organizations.
It's needed.
Yeah.
But my question is, there's so many stories like companies like Google, CBS, there are all these things that are happening.
Right.
What is the best step for a company to take when something happens like that at that level? Like, how do you completely ostracize a person who committed the wrongdoing? Does that create change, or does that create fear of speaking up and speaking out and like coming to an understanding of the differences of thought and things?
Absolutely. That's such a great question. I think it creates a number of things. It definitely creates fear for a lot of people. But sometimes you need that to shake things up a bit. I think if everything was okay in organizations or nothing ever got released, then there wouldn't be change that takes, that would take place. And people have to be held accountable. But I think also a lot of organizations tend to focus on that particular person and say, okay, here, this is what we're going to do. Take the time to figure out where the root issue is really happening. How can you retool your leaders? Really, how can you ensure that leaders are getting the information that they need to be successful and to manage other employees so that they end up excelling and not facing these challenges or harassment or whatever in organizations.
Yeah. Retool your leaders.
Retool
That's
your leaders.
important. And then get your book in order to figure out how to do that, right?
My book, absolutely. Next year, 2019.
Can you name one or two companies that are doing great at diversity and inclusion? Obviously, aside from IAC, because you're there.
I honestly cannot name a company, or honestly name a company and say they're truly excelling at it, just because I'm not in their organization. And I think a lot of the times we get to read about or hear about what organizations are doing, and then
When
we're
you
just
get in
like,
there,
it's different. I hear about all the work that Google is doing, but then you hear about their employees walking out. And I'm like, oh,
which one is it?
Which one is it? Or I hear about, Amazon coming out with about 50,000 new jobs, but what level are those jobs? Are they the warehouse positions, the holiday seasonal positions? I have a friend that actually, she's a marketing director, and she's been looking for, opportunities for a while. And she hasn't been able to find anything, so she's now working at Amazon's warehouse. They have multiple. And she's like, Netta, we're treated like slaves in there.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Rough.
it's hard for me. I can't even sit here and lie to you, I'm sure these organizations that I just talked about, I'm sure they're not terrible, and they're doing the best that they can. I know Google has invested a lot of money, and Amazon as well, but it's not just about investing money. It's really about making sure you have those strategies and not putting everything on your head of D&I.
Yeah.
I think a lot of organizations try to do that as well.
Yeah. You mentioned money. I want us to move now to a segment where we talk about money, but money in a good way.
Okay.
So this segment is called From Inspiration to Invoice, and I was inspired to make sure we had this section because, often people talk about being a boss or being a leader, but they don't talk about the money behind it. And, when you're the one that has to pay that invoice, or when you're the one that's, getting your first invoice paid for what you do.
Right.
So you are also a consultant and speaker. So can you talk about when it came to figuring out what you were going to charge for your expertise? How did you go about that process, and was it difficult for you?
It's still difficult for me because I think a lot of organizations reach out to me and say, oh, could you speak for free? Or could you come into my organization and just talk for 30 minutes? I'm like, well, that's a fee. The number one advice I'd give everyone is know your worth. Know your worth. Know how much gas you have to put in your car. Understand that your outfit goes into it for the day, your hair, your makeup. Whatever you're doing, make sure that it's itemized and you're able to see every single thing on that list that you're spending money on yourself, and add that in, factor that in. Don't forget about it. I think a lot of the times we forget about our worth.
Yeah.
And so now I've been pushing, and letting people know, hey, this is how much I charge. And And also, I have to be okay with missing out on opportunities because they're not paying.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to weigh your options. Some opportunities are great, and you want to negotiate if you're able to maybe get in a magazine or an article that may be very promising.
Yeah.
And you may say, okay, well, I don't need this fee.
Yeah.
But just know your worth.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But how did it feel once you actually got paid for your first speaking or consulting gig?
Oh my gosh, it was such a good feeling. I'm like, they're paying me, and then I had to look in the mirror and say, but you're worth it.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're worth being paid.
It's just hard when something comes natural to you. You just don't think it's something worth charging for.
Yeah.
But you have to know that it's worthwhile.
How are you going to eat? How are you going to sleep? You know, where are you going to live?
Yeah.
So make sure you look out for you and know that, you know, especially if you're a public speaker, you're investing a lot of time in your materials, you going over and over your speech every single day. I mean, I even think about when I get on stage and the nerves start getting to me. That's another extra charge, you know? I'm
the emotional labor.
Yeah, the emotional labor. Like, put that in, too.
Yeah.
So
awesome. Well, you're doing amazing work. Thank you
so much
for taking the time for, you know, this discussion and for being on this show.
Absolutely.
And all of you, make sure you tune in for the next episode where we continue to talk about generating a return on your hustle, your passion, your ambition, and all of the context that goes around making that happen.
Yeah.